investment fund and other things have arisen and are continuing to build steam by the day. The problem is there's a lot of institutional backlash against the rise of this new system. We see this in the media with a lot of narratives that are trying to attack this. Two of the big ones that I encountered, because I personally, and people who tend to read my magazine tend to be economic nationalists. I'm an economic nationalist. I don't see that as a bad word. And I want the West to join the Belt and Road. The problem is there's been a constant repetition over the past months that economic nationalism, whether it's in China, whether it's in America, whether it's in Russia, is intrinsically a bad thing. And I'm not saying that this can't be done badly, but there's a belief that it is intrinsically a bad thing to believe that the nation state has a role to play in the economy, that this means you're a totalitarian. I don't necessarily believe that. Also, that another media narrative that's been coming up increasingly since this summer has been that the Belt and Road Initiative is incompatible with Western values, because this is just China trying to trap other poor countries into debt slavery by getting them to work on big infrastructure projects. So they're going to take on debt and become dependent on China. These are two things that I want to just quickly debunk, even though the time is somewhat limited, but further discussion can be had afterwards anyway. So the first thing on economic nationalism, two big economic nationalists in both America and Chinese history are featured on this 1942 stamp. I don't know if you recognize either one of these two individuals here. Yeah? Everybody know who the guy on the left and on the right is? My right? Lincoln, okay, Lincoln. And on the left? My left? All right. So right below this is of the people, by the people, for the people. This was what Sun Yat-sen used as he was in America, in Hawaii, studying Abraham Lincoln's methods of rail building, his philosophy of government. So Sun Yat-sen spent the formative years of his life studying in America, visiting America not only to raise funds, but also to study what were these American techniques that allowed America to go from an agricultural slave of the British Empire in the 1700s to very quickly the most modern, productive, industrial center of the world. How did that happen? And he brought what he learned into the formation of the Republic of China, into his overthrow of the dynastic system. And with his works, like the International Development of China, which was the 1917 book he wrote, going through all of the big infrastructure, rail, roads, mines, energy policies, ports, he laid it all out. And he was not a fan of Halper Mackinder or geopolitics. He understood by the title that it's only by countries working together and cultures working together that you can have the true natural harmony that is needed for human security and human self-interest to be fully maintained. Halper Mackinder's idea of self-interest as the will of the stronger to manipulate the weaker to fight for scarcity of resources is not real self-interest. It just creates a world where even those who thought they were dominating actually end up in a burning building. Right? That's why empires, as the Thucydides trap that was laid out before defines it, empires always collapse if they always rely on defining their self-interest as their ability to use the weaker. So again, Abraham Lincoln, Sun Yat-sen, two major leaders whose ideas are, especially in the case of China with the Belt and Road, as I'm going to look through a little bit, are coming alive again. Just quickly, I want to just showcase an image that I think everyone here is familiar with. The Belt and Road, in the most general terms, is defined around interactions between China through the Middle East, all the way through to Europe, with extensions over the seas into increasingly Africa. And for those who say that China is just creating a debt trap, as I just want to showcase with a few figures here, and then we'll just put this to an end. That's not true. So, indeed, China has invested a lot in Africa, especially since the year 2000. What we have here are three graphs. One is the US Export-Import Bank investments into Africa, the other one is the World Bank, and the middle one here is the China Export-Import Bank. The World Bank is still much, in terms of their debt that Africa has incurred to external powers, the World Bank is still number one. China has invested amazingly. I mean, the growth from 2000 to over 15 years, this is unfortunately 2015 figures, has been extraordinarily high. But is there a difference in the quality of the debt, right? Are all debts created equal? Or are some debts qualitatively different from others? What you have here is a breakdown. So on your right side, you got the World Bank and U.S. Debts to Africa, or the African debts that they've incurred to U.S. investments, and especially through the World Bank, and where those investments have gone as a breakdown. So obviously the majority here, 66%, is in mining, extraction of resources. A very small percent, 7%, is in manufacturing in Africa. Wholesale trade is 4%, services 9%, and holding companies is 14%. China's a very different breakdown. Yes, they have mining, but it's only 28%. Manufacturing makes up more, it's 13%, almost double. Financial services now, the actual creation of financial services sectors, that's all of a sudden something which didn't exist in the other one. But construction is big. 27% construction, 4% science tech, and then other. Construction, what is that? Is that just building an oil extraction rig? Is that all it is? Run by Shell Dutch Oil, a foreign company or something, in order to get a resource to the Western markets? Well, no. In the case of China, what you've actually seen is a huge growth of rail, roads across Africa, as well as the education of local Africans to become engineers. We've seen this in Sudan and Ethiopia with the Djibouti-Addis Ababa rail line. We've seen this across the board in Nigeria with the first high-speed rail, which is here in Nigeria that's been built, along with thousands of kilometers of conventional rail. Water systems, hydroelectric power, hard and soft infrastructure in almost every country, whether it's Cameroon, you name it, has been built up. So yes, China needs resources. Yes, Africa has a lot of resources. What's the difference between the way that the West has been doing business with Africa versus China? Well, China's actually providing the means for these countries to have an engineering society. They're actually building up local productive sectors. So while you have injustices happening, yes, nothing is perfect, you have a different philosophy where you actually have the means for these countries over the longer term to be able to become self-sustaining. This is not happening overnight, but it's happening. We have here this is first the pictures aren't very good. These are two African engineers working with the Chinese supervisor building one of the bigger rail lines in Ethiopia. And this is a picture which an organization called the Schiller Institute put together to just give an image of what Africa could expect to look like by the year 2058. Right now, one of the biggest water projects in the world has been begun by Power China with the help of an Italian company to move excess water runoff from the Congo River Basin, where there's a lot of flooding, and creating about 2,000 kilometers of canals to connect that up into Lake Chad, which is a lake which has lost 90% of its water over the past 30 years of just cash cropping, of exporting water-sucking cotton, which is pretty much one of the primary functions of the Chad economy. So by refilling that zone, you're going to triple food production, you're going to create industries, infrastructure along the way that are going to drive the upgrading of the cognitive powers of that society. Because when you can create a society that has a long-term outlook to build something that's going to be durable after the deaths of that generation, and also create a specialized class of engineers and scientists, these are people who are not going to just accept walking 5 kilometers or longer every day to, for their water, which is often the case when you don't have infrastructure. You just have to you think it's normal to walk 5 kilometers every day to get water. That's not normal. We should expect to have electricity that we turn on in every household, whether you're in Africa or in Montreal. You should be able to have electricity, refrigeration. So this is something which we're saying is completely in opposition to the pessimistic, entropic philosophy of geopolitics, and is much more in harmony with an idea that every nation is best maintaining their self-interest by working for the self-interest of their neighbors. And that's not utopian, it's not a fantasy, it's something that we've practically seen. It gets sabotaged from time to time, but we've practically seen it, and I believe, have a potential of seeing this again if the Putin, Xi Jinping, and Trump meetings can actually flourish properly and actually produce positive outcome for a new system. So I'll just end it with that, and if people have any questions, now's a good time.
Yeah, actually, the new NAFTA require Canada not to sign any deal with a country without a free market, aka China in this case. So do you think there is still a good chance for China and Canada have a free deal? I mean, later on, like in light of the new NAFTA.
Well, look, I think we definitely need to do trade and business with China. I mean, that's the future. The problem is, if you look at the Canada-China Free Trade Agreement as defined, it never brings in, even once, national infrastructure. It doesn't bring in Belt and Road projects. It doesn't bring in anything like that. So you need to upgrade the thinking on trade. China wants to build infrastructure. Canada's infrastructure is in such bad shape that there was a recent survey of the Canadian Federation of Municipalities that concluded that about 70% of our federal or municipal infrastructure is beyond its life expectancy. Okay, that's a huge number. Look how long it takes to even build something like one bridge off Montreal, right? How long has that taken? How much over budget does that go? And then you see these time-lapse videos on YouTube of China building a bigger, more impressive bridge in like a week for a quarter of the funds. It's embarrassing. We have no high-speed rail. Canada has zero high-speed rail. How much high-speed rail does China have?
A lot.
It's like 20,000 kilometers. And they're planning on doubling that in 5 years, you know? So we gotta just change our idea of what is trade, what is economic relations about, really? Is it just about turning in a profit for cheap stuff we export or raw materials that we export? No, there's something more going on. I think that's the lesson that is going to be learned very quickly as the economic crisis that the world is facing in the West deepens. Yeah.
Do you think the Western world is in like the laissez-faire system too long to trust an economic initiative led by a government-based economy?
Well, that's why you have a lot of turmoil right now around the challenging of the precepts of the World Trade Organization with Trump. You know, by Trump just coming out and canceling the TPP as his first act in office, and then challenging all the precepts underlying NAFTA. Yeah, there's a lot of turmoil. A lot of people have been very encrusted and embedded. A lot of people have relied on that system of laissez-faire and absolute free trade being the norm for a very long time. So it being challenged causes a lot of trouble. Do I think that it's been too long that we've been under this system? No, because that system hasn't really ultimately benefited us, I don't think. Otherwise, we would have the best infrastructure like China does, and we would have our manufacturing still intact. We don't, we lost it all. So I think that you do need to get a correction and a remedy of a lot of the bad decisions that were made, you know, in the 70s, frankly, when the decision was made to become a globalized, laissez-faire world of consumerism.
But the people who host capital, would they really trust like the economy based from a government? Like,
The people who host capital?
yeah, like the rich people, I would say.
Like what?
Like the rich people, would they really trust a government?
I mean, look at China. I mean, how many rich people are getting richer because of China's Belt and Road initiatives? That wouldn't be happening if you didn't have a national backing behind those projects. You make a ton of money, but you're actually doing it in a way where it's not just gambling or speculating on derivatives market. You're doing it in a way which is actually going to create more value in the future. It's what's called anti-entropy. Rather than a system being always just consuming a finite amount of resources as it winds down into homeostasis, it's the opposite. It's the view that human creativity can always create new inventions, new discoveries that transfer back to technology transfers, new forms of resources that we didn't have access to before, that allows for that constant type of growth, which is why space and nuclear are two very important sectors to invest in. That's why China is on the cutting edge of those things, because there's no absolute limit for how much energy we can unlock as we go into the atom, as we go into fusion, or as we go into space. China's going to be the only country soon with a space station. You know, it's going to land on the far side of the moon by the end of this year. I mean, or the beginning of next year. I mean, the universe is a big place. I mean, who's to decide what's the limit of how much we're allowed to grow?
So what's your opinion for the free market and state-owned enterprises?
Well, I agree with Lincoln. I agree with Sun Yat-sen and Xi Jinping. That you don't have to have this idea that there's a dichotomy where you have to pick one or pick the other. I think that you can have a state economy which has a flourishing private sector. But the state has to play a certain positive role in making commitments to build projects that transcend, individual election terms. The state can, for example, take a loss financially. If you're going to build a big project, like look at Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal and the Tennessee Valley Authority that brought electricity to the South. That was many, many years. It was many years of losses, no financial gains for quite some time. But a state can take those losses. If you're working for just shareholder value, you can't do anything that's not going to make a profit very quickly. So that puts a big shackle on what you can do.
Okay. Build bridge.
Yeah.
Is easy.
Okay.
Just print the money. If the government want to do it, just print the money. That's the best way. But as a taxpayer, we need to pay eventually the loan plus the interest. So that's what happened in the last 20 years. Of course, China has get a great progress economically and in terms of those roads, railways. But at the same time, there is a big problem for debt. So nowadays, the interest on the debt is bigger and bigger. It's a huge problem. Because it's not saying, for example, Canada, we cannot do it. Because the government must constrain, say, within the budget. Otherwise, it's easy. American can print the money to build it, forget it, who will pay the loan. So that's the big issue, just like I'm a financial advisor. So we need to do the things within your budget, right?
Okay. Let me just speak to that quickly, because I think there's another speaker after me. NASA did a study back in the late 1970s that should be redone today, but what they basically calculated using a team of economists was that for every dollar invested into NASA, there was $10 of return in nonlinear ways to the economy as a whole. Look at what we have, the internet, satellites, cell phones, you name it, came out of so much of our lives. Came out of just the one initiative of putting a person on the moon. There are certain types of debt that are called self-liquidating debts. So when you invest in certain things, the overall effect of having created a network of intercontinental high-speed rail, right? That effect will self-liquidate the debt that you incurred over the short-term period, but it will take time. And you're going to create a whole new basket of industries and potentials for productivity that couldn't have existed without that initiative to have occurred, right? It's a way of thinking which can't be charted in linear monetary equations, because you don't know what type of discoveries are going to happen along the way. You can't chart out exactly what's going to happen to the number. But I can tell you, I can guarantee you that there's certain, like when you invest in space, if you do it with a serious intention, that will erase the debt that you incurred, even though it's a big debt, to make it happen. If you just invest in casinos, yeah, you'll maybe make a lot of money happen and circulate quickly in the system, but the debt is only going to increase because you're becoming less productive. People are basically pouring their money into something anti-productive. So if you want to have casinos, that's fine, but if the state wants to invest in a bunch of casinos, no, it's going to be a short-term monetary gain, but the future is going to make the debt worse. That's why, in many ways, the debts incurred by the World Bank or the IMF only got worse for a lot of third world countries since the 70s. They didn't go down, and people are wondering why. It's because they didn't build up those countries. They didn't build up the infrastructure or the capabilities of those countries to stand on their own 2 feet.